to the Bayview Podcast with hosts Andrew Clark and Chris Emery. This is designed to be a discussion on all things life and faith. We hope this serves as a weekly resource and encouragement to you.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Bayview Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Andrew, joined as always by Chris. How are you, man?
I am doing super well. It's a great day. It's a beautiful day outside. It's just kind of a beautiful time of year. Yeah, I'm good, man. So,
Sweet.
Yeah, we're doing well. We've had a lot going on around here, exciting things, so that makes it fun. And had baptism this last week at the time of this recording, and yeah, baptized a lot of people. I don't even know how many we baptized. We were out there a long time.
Yeah, that was cool. A lot of young faces too, which is always exciting.
Yeah,
between teens and children, a lot of new faces, people that have just joined us fairly recently. But it was always a cool special time. It helps to do it in the Bay. Like that's just a difference maker too.
Yeah.
A pretty cool experience.
Well, and for it to be one of those rare, like really rare, 88-degree September days in northern Michigan, like that's super odd for us to have that kind of heat. Yeah. But it was just absolutely perfect. Yeah. So I had a good time, man. It was usually I'm racing to get out of the water. I walked around. There was somebody in a boat. I walked over and talked to the people in the boat. I was just like, I'm just gonna hang out for a while. Yeah.
It's a good like local summer day.
It was super good.
Super fun.
So hey, thanks for being with us today. It's always just we look forward to these times on the podcast just to get together. And as you know, we're kind of in this stretch where we are focusing on stories. And in fact, a couple weeks ago, Andrew, you preached on a Sunday morning about to go and tell your story. We all have a story, and the stories of our lives, they're being authored by, Jesus is the author of those stories, but they need to be told. And our stories have power. Our stories have so much influence on the people around us because they tell about the things that maybe happened before Jesus, or tragedies or suffering. And we've heard a lot of those stories over the last several weeks. And to me, there's just so much power in that. We can preach on a Sunday morning and tell you what Jesus wants to do, but the story tells you what Jesus has done and is doing. And so we're always appreciative to get to hear stories. And so we're excited to have a guest with us today. And so today we welcome Solé Wright to the podcast studio. So welcome, Solé.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So it's so good to have you here. Give everybody the quick overview. Who is Solé? Family? What do you do? Just kind of there's a lot in there, so I don't want to try and pack it all in.
Well, I have 4 children. I've been married, I think, for 35 years now. We celebrated our 35th year. 4 kids. They range from 32 to 22. My boys are on the end. The girls are in the middle, 29 and 25. And I have 4 awesome grandbabies. Those are the best.
They are the best.
If you could have them first, right?
Yes.
I used to work in investments many, many years ago.
Okay.
Loved it. And then I became an at-home mom, and that was my favorite job in the whole world. And in my 30s, God impressed in my heart to write a book. And it's about stories. So it's definitely a go and tell story.
Yeah.
In my book, I share a little bit about my mom's story of redemption as well as my story. And that's what I've done, I guess, since I've had an empty nest. I've been dabbling a lot in the writing.
Super cool. And what's the title of your book?
It's After Some Time, Connecting with Women Through Real Life Stories. And after some time is, the reason it's after some time is because sometimes we're in the struggle of a situation and we don't see when redemption will come. And I have seen parts of my story where I didn't see God redeeming a situation, like 40 years later. As a matter of fact, I had a revelation of something I was really struggling with throughout my whole life. And I was 51, 52 years old when God revealed to me, and he redeemed that part of my life. So after some time, I think we all have an after some time redemption story.
That's cool. What a great thing. Is it available on Amazon?
It is.
Okay, so we'll make sure and get that link put in our comments.
Thank
so
you.
after the podcast today, if you want to go check out Solé's book, I would highly recommend you do that. Jump on that. So
yeah, no, that's a really cool title too. Just the idea of it. Life tends to feel like a big long waiting game, and that's that whole like game we would we asked the question today in our staff meeting, like if you could control time, and it's like, or fly. But that idea of controlling time, it's like we would love to speed things up, slow things down, get to the end quicker. I found like while reading some books, I'm like, I just want this book to be done so I know how it ends, or vice versa, slow it down. But I think when we wait on God's timing for what He's doing and why He's doing what He's doing, yeah, I that resonates of like, I just feel like I'm waiting, and time after time, it passes. But
well, especially when those seasons that you're in are painful, or heavy, that's when the waiting is longer, and slower. We want to speed that up, and there's just no way to speed up something like grief. There's no way to speed up recovery or healing. I mean, those are not fast processes. But it's waiting on God to complete these things, do what He's wanting to do. I think even a few weeks ago, we had a mutual friend of ours, Garrett Cars, preach here at Bayview, and he talked about his mom being really honest with him, like, Garrett, I'm not praying for God to rescue you. I'm praying for God to use this refining time. Yeah. And it's like, really, Mom? Like, no rescue? Like, really? No. Yeah. The refining moments is what God desires to do in our lives. And I think that's the stories. That's where the stories come into play.
Absolutely. I think of the story of the Samaritan woman and how her testimony, when she went back to the village, her testimony caused many people to come to Christ. And that's the premise of my book, is our stories are so connected with one another. Yeah. And I feel like we need to give each other permission to come out and share those ugly parts of our story, because that's where people are stuck in their secrets and they're stuck in shame with those parts of their story. So my challenge has been to share, just be open and share, because I have a chapter that's called If People Knew. And that's where our secrets keep us stuck. And whenever we start to open up and share about these secrets is whenever people, we're giving them permission to just share their own. And then God can start working with that. Yeah. And we start experiencing freedom in Christ at that moment. In my book, I share a lot about domestic violence, topics that we don't talk about much. No one wants to admit there's domestic violence in their home. There was in my home growing up, not in my home now. I'm married to a great man. So you never hear anyone talk about that. And that was a shame that my mom was trapped in. So she really had no one to go to. Therefore, all the children suffered under the hand of an abuser, among other abuses. And I've dared to share about my own struggles with suicide ideation and how God has saved my life so many times, at my own hand. Yeah. Even at the hand of my mother, as I shared earlier with you. I'm an abortion survivor. So even before I was born, there was almost like a hand of death over my life. I was told as a little girl that I wasn't wanted. And my mother tried to abort me. And even as a young child, I didn't know what an abortion was, but I knew what he meant. It was my stepfather when he said you weren't wanted. And this is how a predator grooms his prey. He uses these things against them. And I learned through the years of the stories I was told, I've confirmed them, and they're all true, on how my mother tried ending my life before I was even given a chance. And oftentimes people ask me what my name means. So I'm going to just lay it out, because people always say,
bring it on.
What does your name mean? What does Solé mean? Solé in Spanish is alone. So that's where my mom was. And I understand where she was. She was at a very dark time in her life, and I share a little bit about that in my book. And I understand why she felt that was the only way out. But her naming me Solé and just everything that happened in the womb affected my life growing up. So I think my first time trying to take my life, I was about 7 years old. Wow. And God saved my life then through the help of my brother and as a teenager. So I really struggled with this all throughout my life. And just recently, I experienced a tough time, just a fatal crash. And those demons visited me again. But God's so good. My history with him tells me who he is today.
Mm-hmm.
And I can hold on to everything that he's brought me through. Because after some time, he's shown me what redemption looks like. And even in the grief and the suffering, it's like the Lord always prepares a table for us. Whether when we're celebrating, the feast looks a little bit different.
Yeah.
We may have new wine, and the food is so much different than when we're celebrating new life. But when the table is spread with grief and suffering, it is so good.
Mm. Wow.
What he feeds my soul is so good that nothing can compare.
Yeah.
During those times of the food just tastes better. And you grow. And it's not like a party that you want to invite anyone to.
Right.
Because you don't want someone else tasting that.
Yeah. Interesting. Wow, that's so powerful. Because I've always kind of had the belief, and I've told people that there are levels of joy and peace and faithfulness from God that he reserves to only expose you to in your deepest suffering. And again, it's not that we want to invite suffering into our life or invite others into it, but just know that when those times come, there are levels that he is holding back and reserved. Like, no, at your lowest, I've got something you weren't even ready for. And I know you've experienced that, Andrew. I know you and your family, you guys have experienced a lot of that in some of the darkest possible parts of your story and your darkest days. But I just love that imagery of like the feast is so much, it's so beautiful in those moments.
I experienced something in this season of grief, and I wasn't grieving for me. I've had losses through this accident, cognitive losses and severe pain that I deal with on a daily basis, but there was a life lost and a baby. And that's been very hard for me, even though I was not at fault. I was a witness to it, and I was a part of that. But my season of grieving for someone else and suffering was different this time because I experienced joy. Joy coexisted with grief. And with everything I've been through in my whole life, I've never had joy and grief coexisting together. And it's so hard to explain. And I've been digging into this, and I find that joy is not an emotion like when you're happy. Yeah. Joy is a fruit of the Spirit.
Right.
And it's almost like that fruit was growing in me in the season of suffering, which just goes to show the table God prepared for me was full of this internal joy that the world cannot give. So that's been an interesting part of this season. There's been just so much growth, and after some time, redemption part of this story, I cannot see it right now. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen. I don't know what that's going to look like, but it's been over a year, and I cannot see. Sometimes when you're in the valley, you can't see the light yet, but there's some growth happening.
Yeah. Because it is early on. It's been just a little over a year and a half since this accident. So, we were just talking about patience, right? And you have a 40-year redemption part of your story already. And it's like, a year and a half is a long time, but when we put in the scope of healing and God redeeming the pain and the wounds, and there's, in a lot of ways, it's like it's still so early. And I mean, those of you that have lost close loved ones, that the grieving never stops. I've always felt so, I guess, frustrated when I hear someone maybe trying to help someone go through that process and try and use words like, well, you'll move on at some point, or at some point you'll get over it. It's like, no, none of that is accurate. You never move on. You never get over it. There's a new normal that you become existing in. And this is always part of your story now. It doesn't mean, but as any part of our story, there will come moments where there's beautiful redemption parts of it. And you can't have redemption without the pain. You can't have redemption without the fall. I mean, the whole idea of this is there's this great story. Jesus is the hero, and it involves that he redeems our stories. But sometimes getting there is long.
It is long, but I think there's growth. And I'm learning. I used to tell myself, just accept what you can't change, accept it. And a friend told me, what about changing the word accept to embrace? What a different picture. Accepting is, I was accepting reluctantly, but embracing, you embrace wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
Like even a mental picture of embracing, it's like you picture arms just wrapping themselves around you. Where acceptance, you're kind of kicking and screaming.
It's like a cordial handshake is what I kind of picture.
Right,
like
right.
This acceptance is being like, okay, yeah, but that embrace to actually, like, you bring it in close.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's you're embracing it. This is part of what it is. Yeah, I'm bringing it closer. And what is this going to look like from here on out? And how can I use this to honor God? And that's where I'm at right now. My hands are open. It's like, Lord, show me. This has not changed. A week after the accident, I told my husband, I'm all black and blue, and I'm like, I will not dishonor my Lord in this. He's still my God, and whatever happens, happens. And, you know, we're tight.
Yeah.
We're tight, and he's constantly refining. It's that refinement.
Yeah.
I look back at some of the things I've been through, identity issues. When I was a little girl, my stepfather shaved my head, and I looked like a little boy. He dressed me like a boy. And even as a woman, I'd look in the mirror and see myself as a boy until God revealed to me that you're a woman. And it was just such a beautiful, after some time, redemptive part of my story. And I see everything that he's brought me through, and it's just shown me how faithful he is. And we're just chipping away another part of you, Solé, because I am refining you to be the woman that I have called you to be, to do my will in your life.
Wow.
So that's where I stand, just surrendered. And after some time, God, have your will.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
Nope.
Not easy at all.
Yeah. Especially because there is so many of those things that, like, just straight up we'd rather just not deal with. And I think a lot too, my wife and I have talked a lot about, like, we experienced a miscarriage before our first son. And it was just like, I remember my dad saying, well, you don't know how this part of your story is going to affect other people. So he was like, you know, this is terrible. This, you know, kind of went through that line, but just was that reminder. And we've talked honestly how, like, that's always just been such a hidden part. And I feel like it is a really hidden thing, but, like, you know, you bring it up and you realize how many people that's affected. And that idea of, like, I think in a lot of ways, part of the sharing of our stories, even when we're still in the midst of waiting, is there's a reminder to others that you're not alone in those struggles or in those pain. And it's the same thing when my father passed. And it was like, I tried so hard for so long to push aside the idea that he would take his own life, and almost like fought against that. And there was not a next step in the healing process until that acceptance or that embracing of, like, this is part of the story now. And yeah, I just think that word is so good, that embracing of, like, it's okay to be hurt and to be confused and not know where the light's going to come. But I think when you start embracing some of these things as just the reality of your story, like, that's where you do see the growth. And even if you're still in the midst of the valley, you said it already, like, there can still be growth that's happening. A step forward, even if it's the smallest step possible, is still a step forward. It's still part of the redemption process. And yeah, you just don't know. You don't know how it's going to affect other people, but that's the beauty of story, and story is meant to be told.
Absolutely. That's why if people knew is such a trap. The lies that we tell ourselves, oh, if people knew this about me, or if people knew I did this or that just keeps people in shame. There's no freedom in that. I think there's a verse that says, we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And I don't know if that calls, you know, this type of testimony. And let the redeemed of the Lord share their testimony. Absolutely. There's a reason why we have a testimony, and there should never be any shame in it. And especially women, there's a lot of shame around the topic of abortion. And I felt like I always had to protect my mother in that topic, because she had an abortion before she attempted the one with me. And I was always on the fence on the topic, because no, if I'm all pro-life, I'm not protecting my mother or my friends that have been in that situation. But because they're not sharing their story, there's no freedom, so they're trapped in that if people knew shame. And a lot of women are, just different aspects of their life, and men too.
Sure.
But I'm more for, ministering and speaking to women.
Absolutely.
And I found with surrender also throughout life, the struggle, like when you're grieving, that's so hard. Like when you're suffering or hurting for someone, or when when my mom passed, the grief is so painful, but nothing is more difficult than actually surrendering it. We battle through our grief, but to actually give it to the Lord, that is more difficult than the whole process of grieving. Yeah. Yet he wants it.
Yeah. I feel like surrendering the pain side of things, or the if you only knew side of things, that is so difficult, at least in my experience, because that's the stuff I feel like I can control. Like I can control how much you know, and I can control what you see and understand, and I can control what you know of my story. And in the end, you just end up kind of throwing yourself deeper into the pit, because you've not given it over where he's asked you to give him everything. And it's like but that pain tends to be the thing, at least in my experience. It's like, well, I'm strong enough to deal with it or find the healing from it. And when you find they're just like, okay, like I can't. And that giving it over, man, there is such freedom and I redemption in that.
How much of it is also almost a level of self-preservation too, because to give it over means you have to become more vulnerable. And we associate vulnerability with the potential for more pain. And it's like, all right, this already hurts so much that I need to hold this tight, hold this close, and keep everything else out. I don't want to hurt more. And I just see so many people sometimes that they think they're protecting themselves, but that close-handed living, it refuses the ability to accept anything God's trying to pour at you. You can't receive anything with a closed fist. And I just see Satan using these things. I love the title of that chapter. I love that, because that is right where so many people are. And I believe it's right where Satan wants to keep them. Isolation, shame, alone, embarrassment, just all that. There's a reason that isolation is a punishment still used in our prison system. Like, isolation is never good. And Satan would love to just keep, if you're listening, he'd love to keep you isolated in your shame, in your grief, in your pain, and because he can keep you there. You're stuck.
I'm going to take it a little further about what you believe you can control. In that chapter, I talk about, we think we can control it, but the bottom line, it's controlling us. And we don't think about that. And that's what I talk about, secrets. We think we're keeping our secrets, but the bottom line, they're keeping us.
Oh, that's good.
Because they keep us trapped in that cycle of shame. As a teenager, I had, there were things that happened in my home that I wanted to repress. So I went in the path of drugs and I was on the wrong path because I was thinking I could control it. So what happens is when you're caught in that cycle of thinking you can control it, you start like one sin upon sin because one has to outdo the other. So you think you're under control, but definitely it's controlling you. Do you see how that cycle is? So, and that's what happens. We get trapped in this perpetual cycle because it's under control. It's under control. What do I have to do to control it? But it's controlling us.
It's interesting. There's actually a moment in the Exodus story where, of course, God's people have been crying out for freedom from Egyptian slavery for generations. They've been there 400 years. God finally sends Moses. He's here to fulfill his promise of freedom, but through that freedom, of breaking that cycle, there's a path of hardship. It's going to be difficult, and this is when Pharaoh takes away their straw. And he says, you're going to make the same number of bricks, but no straw. So now they have to collect all the stubble, and the quotas are raised, the beatings increase. And so they see they see the path to freedom, but it's through this hardship, and they decide it's too hard. And it's interesting, they actually go back and they're angry with Moses and Aaron, and they say, why? Basically what they're saying is, why can't you just leave it alone? Let us go back to how it was. Like this, we're willing to go back to just being, it was terrible before. You were slaves. You were unhappy. You were crying for freedom, but you could not get out of that cycle. So much so that they wanted to retreat to the norm of their slavery. And it's kind of, I vision that as you're talking about that it's not easy. There's nothing easy about it. And so many people just retreat to the normalcy of their entrapment, their enslavement, to shame and guilt and pain, and that's not God's plan.
No. The challenge is to have a taste of his goodness. And I've shared that before. If you can just taste a little bit of God's goodness, you want to go to that table, whether it's the table of celebration or the table of grief. Once you've tasted the goodness of God, whatever comes your way, you're going to go back to the table. I think of the story in the Old Testament of Mephibosheth. I share a little bit about that in my book, and how King David wanted to restore to him everything that was taken from him. And he told him, you can come and eat at my table as one of my sons. And I just think of the Lord just saying, come to me. I want to restore to you everything that's been taken from you, and you get to dine with me every day. So to me, that table setting is so personal and deep, because there is some goodness in there.
Very much.
And
so.
Once you've had that excellent meal, you can't go back
so true.
to something else, because everything else is junk food. It's a substitute. Then the goodness of true soul nourishment. And that's my challenge. My challenge for women is to taste the goodness of the Lord. Take a chance with someone that's safe, and just share one if people knew story. Just that's taste so some of that goodness and experience some of that freedom, because there's so much good in it. Not only that, if you can take on the challenge of sharing your people news story, you're giving someone else permission to do the same. And that's how we can experience true freedom. And then we can walk into the purpose that God has for us, because there's nothing holding us down.
Good.
I like that. I love the imagery of that. It just, I'm thinking as you're talking about, for me, living in Buffalo, New York ruined me for buffalo wings. Like, I love buffalo wings. But once you live in Buffalo and you taste the real deal, it ruins every other buffalo wing out there, because nothing compares. Like, no, you don't understand.
Not even B-dubs?
Those are chicken wings. Those aren't buffalo wings. Those are fighting words. Don't even do that.
Sorry.
No, they don't. So I just envision that. Like, I get it. Like, yeah, you taste of the Lord, and he tells us, taste of the Lord, taste that he's good. Nothing else will ever compare. It ruins you. It ruins all the other tastes, but in a beautiful way. So they take us down that path a little bit, a little deeper in that chapter, because maybe there's somebody listening like, hey, I hear what you're saying. I love it. I get it. Being trapped is not what I want to be. I don't want to be in this place. I don't even know where to start. Like, I don't even know where to start to step into this, into finding this freedom and pulling. I don't even know how to pull myself up to the table. What would be some encouragement you would have for someone that maybe feels that?
Well, I realize not everybody feels like they have safe people around them, but there are safe people. The problem is that we have become complacent, and I think our culture has changed so much to the point that we're really not going on a deeper level. Like, and I think that's not how God intended community and relationships to be. First of all, if a person feels they don't have a safe place to start, you got to dump it. Journal. That stuff needs to come out somehow or another. So I truly believe that the first step would be dumping those secrets or whatever it may be. And if you don't want anybody to read it, burn it up. Write it down and burn it up. There's something whenever it comes out that starts losing its power. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. You've shared something like, oh, I feel so much better. It's off my chest. That just show how heavy if people knew secrets are. And if this person, they need to find a safe person, maybe a counselor. I welcome emails. I'm fine with, I've had lots of people reach out to me after I published my book. It's because people want to talk. I think people are just so hungry for authentic community. And I truly believe that if you can find a safe person, to share your if people knew secrets, you're giving them permission to do the same. And I've heard so many stories of women just so hungry for authentic community. And I'm sure men feel the same way. We're just hungry to be real.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work to fake it.
Oh,
I
huge.
can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
Like I stopped doing that years ago. This is the real deal. This is who I am, tears and all.
Yeah.
And I'm struggling. I don't have it figured out. I struggle, but I've tasted the goodness of God, and I can tell you that he has it figured out. I don't need to know it, but he's walked me through darker valleys. I shared with my counselor recently, man, and it's funny, it sounds ridiculous. Man, I can talk to people that have been through sexual abuse. I can talk to people that have overcome drug abuse, domestic violence. I can do this, but why can't I talk to people that have been through this tragic car crash? And inside of me, the Holy Spirit says, it's because you haven't healed yet.
That's right.
There's healing that needs to be done. And one day you'll be able to share, your grief and just the pain of witnessing what you saw. But it's because I haven't healed yet.
Yeah.
So that just shows that after some time, God will enable you to enter into your story through that lens of redemption.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think what you said earlier, though, like, but there is healing all along the way. And like even hearing you talk about it now, I think I heard you tell this story for the first time about a year ago at home group, because we were in a home group together, and you were barely able to tell the story. Again, 6 months after the fact, very raw, very deep wounds still, but even seeing how much God has brought healing to you now, even though I know you're not healed, but man, God has been so faithful even in this last year, to the point where you're like, yeah, I can tell the story a little bit now, and I can start to see how God will use it. That's his faithfulness.
It is.
And that's how and I think we've experienced that, but yeah, I just want to encourage you, like he's already using that part of your story in a big way.
I can see that. I think at the day of the accident, I was on the side of the road just pleading for her life, not knowing. And I heard that she knew God, that she was saved. And like, what are the chances?
Yeah.
And God knew how hard that was for me, because she was my son's age and she was expecting a baby like my daughter. It was very close to home. And that's when my book was to be published, and I shared about how God saved me in the womb, and he couldn't save this baby. So there was so much to reconcile in the process that I am reconciling with the Lord. And even still, he's good.
Amen.
And I can't see it any other way, but just hearing that she had a personal relationship with Jesus, that God put people in my life to let me know that she had a personal relationship with Jesus. That's an after some time testimony, isn't it?
Yep.
Well, I think a message it was you, Andrew, preached a message. I don't know how long ago it was, but where you just really laid it out clearly that, before the tragedy, before pain, God is good. After pain, after tragedy, or during, God is still good.
Yeah.
He's the same God. God was good before the accident. God is good after the accident, because that's who God is. And that's the table we keep pulling ourselves back to, back to the good God's table. So good.
And I think you're really wise, and you talk about that, the dumping of what's going on, because what I think you'll find, and maybe you talk about this in your book, or maybe you can elaborate on this a little bit. I think you find once you start getting that stuff out, you actually find the root of what the actual struggle is. I realized that with talking with my counselor about all my dad's stuff, is I finally one day admitted of just like, when I bring up the suicide and all that with his life, and I'm just like, it finally boiled down to, I was so concerned about his legacy. And I was like, in my mind, all of what he just did tarnishes his legacy. And so I was like trying to pick up that weight of like, well, okay, so how do I make his legacy right? And I just remember my counselors being like, that's not your responsibility. And I'm like, well, and he's like, no. He's like, just think about it. He's like, your responsibility is to step back and see what God is doing with his legacy, and just look at you'll never understand the seeds planted. You'll never fully know the growth. And like, he just kind of walked me down that path of that. But I didn't know that was such a big deal until I started dumping all this other stuff that was bothering me or holding me back, or that I felt like I was trying to control, that was controlling me. And then all of a sudden that came out, and it was just it was like a legit relief way. It totally switched my perspective of anything. And then all of a sudden I started to see that redemptive side of what he had been doing.
Wow.
So I don't know for you if that's similar when you talk about getting it off your chest, if that's kind of the path you go down.
And sometimes we unpack things that just doesn't make sense. Like, what was this thought all about? And it just flees. But there's definitely power in unpacking. Yeah. It starts to make sense. Maybe, if you can unpack it with someone that's wise, a little more mature in their walk, and they can see things that you don't see, because that stuff is too close to us. We don't see it, Yep. Yeah. Definitely. I think I think everybody needs to do some unpacking.
Oh, without a doubt.
There is healing in that.
Yeah.
There is healing.
Nicole, my wife, and I have this thing where we just randomly be like, I just need to say this. It's not about you. I just need to say this out loud so I can get it out of my head. I don't need answers. I just let me say, and like, but there's so much relief, because sometimes it's just a random weird thought that really has nothing to do with anything, but if I was to keep it, I would dwell on it. And if I dwell on it, then all of a sudden that cycle starts again. And so, yeah, that idea of just getting it out, whatever that looks like, I think is so good.
Well, if you think about the old days, like, what did people do? They sat around telling stories.
Yeah, that's right.
That's therapy right there.
That's right.
How often do we sit around, tell stories? Yeah. Sometimes people are uncomfortable in that.
Yeah. It's a constant reminder when meeting with families, preparing for funerals. I'm trying to, and I think you do this too, like, Chris, we were constantly reminding, like, it is okay to tell stories. It is okay to laugh. It is okay to cry. Enjoy sitting around the living room, just saying, hey, remember when? Yeah. Or did you ever know this? Like, just that ability, there's so much healing that comes from that. Yeah. Yeah.
I typically, in fact, if I'm doing a funeral service for someone that I didn't really know, which is common, I'll do that thing. I'll tell the family, listen, I'm going to sit here with my notebook, just start telling stories. Just start talking about who this person was. And they get to go, and I'm just taking notes, and because they're always like, what are you going to talk about? We'll figure that out. Just go. Yeah. And you start seeing them laugh. Mixture of laughters and tears, and oh yeah, this, and it leads to this, and it begins to get all of that out. Yep. And open that door again. It's closed fist, open handed, right? It begins to open that hand. Yeah. Whereas yes, you feel like you're losing, but it's a posture of receiving, and that's where we're called to be. It's a posture of humility. It's a posture of openness. It's a posture that says, okay, God, take what you will, but give what you desire. And we don't live in a world that lives that way at all. We live in a world that is increasingly closed-fisted, increasingly isolated. I mean, I think of the younger generation that you work so much with. How many of them really, truly have any deep, real relationships? They've mistaken it for digital relationships and digital engagements. But that's why you work with students. I travel and speak to students a lot. One of the most common things I hear now is how alone they feel. And that's a scary place to be, because that's where a lot of pain and things begin to find their traction in our lives, is in our loneliness and hiding.
Yeah, you made the comment about how heavy the mask can be. And that's a conversation I have a lot with students of, like, you, because of the digital age and social media, like, you can really design your mask to look however you want it to look.
That's true.
And the danger with that is, and if we're not careful, you have to get really comfortable wearing that mask, because you're probably going to build some of these relationships, step into the workforce, whatever it might be, with that mask on. And that's going to get really heavy over time. And there's going to be that point where you're like, man, this isn't even who I am, but I have to kind of keep this facade up. And it's like, just get rid of it. Like just, it's not worth it. It just be you, and you'll see so much more fruit. And I think a lighter walk, right? Not so much an easier walk, but just the ability to walk through things and experience things for their fuller potential, because it's not, you're not hidden.
Right. It gives them permission to be their authentic self. And we're losing that. Along with losing authenticity in who we are and losing community, we're also losing something I'm learning is lamenting. We're losing the ability to lament. And I feel like this is why we have such a mental health crisis, especially among our youth, because everything is suppressed.
Absolutely.
And I'm learning that biblical lamenting is the why, you know, the Psalms, the why and how long when we read the Psalms. And that is the unpacking and the purging of your pain and your soul. And somehow we need to bring this back into, especially our youth, into community.
Right. I think Brendan Manning, the author, you know, he called it your imposter. And that we feel the imposter. I think kids today would probably, maybe, you know, going younger generation, it's almost like your avatar. You know, it's that persona that you've created, you've built. This is everything that I think everybody wants me to be, or I want them to see me as. Behind is the real me. And he talks about the weight of the imposter, and that, you know, he's writing a lot to men, that men, our imposter is a little different, that we want to put out the front that I've got it handled, I can deal with it, I've got it under control, I'm strong enough, I don't need help. You know, those are all those lies that behind is everything that is keeping us imprisoned.
It's a really interesting thing, just on the youth topic real quick, of just like myself and some of the volunteers in our student ministry, we get to spend some time every once in a while like playing a video game with another student, and it's normally wearing a headset, sitting in our basement. They're in their room in their home, so we're not actually in the space together. We're playing some game, and it's so interesting the conversations I'll have like that, where we're not face to face, but then when I see that individual in person and I treat them and speak to them like as if we were in that same setting, right? But now I'm looking them in the eye and I'm saying, hey, and I'd like to see their eyes light up. It's that reminder of like, I know who the real you is, and I see you. And I think you talk about that vulnerability, or that being real, the authenticity, all those things, is that accepting of self, and the ability to just look at someone else and say, I see you, is a really powerful thing. And hopefully that is creating those safe places and spaces for people to unpack and to begin kind of walking through whatever it is that needs to be redeemed. So.
Well, and come at it from this angle too. It's not only, you know, if people only knew, yes, but come from the truth of God does know. God knows your true self. God knows everything you're trying to hide. God knows the things that cause you shame. God knows the things that burden you with guilt. God already knows, and he loves you madly. And that's where so many people get stuck. But God can't love me. He not only can, he does. He already does. He loved you before you were. He loved you first. So don't let the lies of Satan keep you trapped. Don't let the shame keep you in prison. He loves you. Run to him. Run to him. He is setting this table, and he's set it for you. And it's the story of the prodigal son. It's the father that sees the lost son who'd rebelled against him, and before the son could even get his sales pitch out, I just want to be a slave. Dad has no time for that. What I got time for is to throw my robe around you, put rings on your finger, kill the fatted calf. We're throwing a party because everything I've wanted is now here. You came home.
And there's a table prepared for them.
And there you go. Let's party.
There's the feast.
Let's eat. I am so hungry now. We've talked about food this entire podcast. Well, hey, Solé, I two things. One, thank you so much for being on today. And I would dare say I'd love to invite you back, because I think there's so much more we want to talk about. And I think that your story has so much more that those listening really need to hear. So we definitely want to invite you back for another time. In the short term, we're going to put your link to your book in our comment section. You mentioned people can email you. Is your email in the book or how?
It is, and I have a website. It's my name, www.solewright.com.
Okay, we'll get that in the comments as well. So go seek this out. I think you're want to read the book. Go find our website and hear more from her story. And yet we will definitely have a time to get you back on because this is super cool.
Thank you.
So thanks for sharing. Thanks for letting God use your story, Solé.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, hey, if you haven't done so, click subscribe, whatever platform you're listening on. That way you never miss an episode. We're here each and every week, and we're going to keep diving into stories here. And so it's just been a great day today. Again, Solé, thanks for being with us. And until next week, this is Andrew, Chris, and Solé. We will see you next time around.